Welcome to the Guest House. I'm Sean Perel. I'm an integrative therapist, a yoga and meditation teacher, a lifelong student of the thesis of our belonging, and I'm also a parent and a fellow human being grappling with many of the same questions that you may be grappling with too. In these conversations, I'm turning to some of the folks I most admire, and together we're exploring the complexities and also the creative potential of being human in an era of radical change. Thank you so much for being with us.
Dear friends, last year's inaugural retreat to Ballymaloe House in County Cork, Ireland, was lauded as among the most rejuvenating experiences of most participants' lives. That's why I am delighted to return with my co-teacher, Erin Dorwald, next September 20th to 26th, 2026, for the Tender Harvest, a week-long immersion amidst the golden hues and organic bounty of a world-class country manor and cooking school, Ballymaloe House. Each day will bring yoga, meditation, farm-to-table meals, and curated excursions including a visit to Blarney Castle, a cliff walk in Ballycotton, natural spas along the breathtaking coastline of County Cork, plus ample time for rest and self-nurturance, embodiment, and creative reclamation. So, spots are limited and will fill quickly. Payment plans are available, and you can save $200 on shared rooms when you register before June 1st. Hope to see you there. My guest today is Mark Jensen. Mark has been in the healing arts for the past 40 years at the confluence of osteopathy, Taoism, herbalism, and chiropractics. His expertise runs deep, and he is truly an integrated practitioner. Mark's work draws on earth-based practices, plant intelligence, deep ecology, communion with the teachings of elders like Joanna Macy. He works in the context of private practice, and he also teaches for nonprofits, classes in herbalism and internal arts. Mark leads ceremonies and movement practices, and he's attended births and deaths, including the birth of my own first child, which was almost 10 years ago now. What I love most about Mark is his ability to anchor a truly mystical vision in deep scholarship and study of science and the natural world. He calls his work the Circle of Visions, and he teaches the cultivation of attentional intimacy and communion with the incredible presence and intelligence of life itself. And he's not afraid to hold space for the wild grief and joy of being alive at a time of ecological and societal unraveling. I was honored to share this time with Mark, to allow our conversation to go where it needed to. And it did. We jumped into the deep end, and Mark shared from a profound place of tenderness and courage and wisdom. I hope you enjoy this rare conversation between friends.
I'm touched and grateful. I've actually wanted to sit and have a conversation for a long time. There's a few places we could dive in. I mean, one is, I just need to acknowledge Joanna Macy, who you mentioned, because she came up in our little conversation before, and she came up again for me as we were sitting quietly. And then from her, it's just this kind of cascade of so many influences and teachers, that it wouldn't be right not to acknowledge they're in the room, or the land itself. Tears come to my eyes, right? Because I think that Joanna's the first teacher I met that really helped me understand power and potency and importance of grief, and that perhaps it's not for everyone in a way, but I think there are grievers, and for some of us that path actually takes us into a deeper relationship to love and a deeper relationship to soul. And for me, in that work and other work I've done, my soul is that part of me that comes from the earth itself. And that is that connection that seems so ancient. For me, all the work, all healing comes back to that. What is the emergence, of whatever you want to call her.
I was in a place of real ecological despair, not really knowing where to put it, like walking around, my daily life as though having just landed from another planet, and just it was a reckoning, paradox of raising small children and being here with all our kind of human faculties and knowing the pain we're inflicting. But I was just kind of overwhelmed. You were working on me at that moment. You just kind of paused. You said, what if this is what it looks like for a 5 billion-year-old mother to give birth? It really stayed with me. It was powerful.
That comes from some experiences. I could weave it into a bunch of what I would call the circle of visions. But I'll pick a place to start because it was here in these mountains before I lived here, actually. And through a series of events that tells you you're not going where you thought you were going today, right? And you're going here instead. And I ended up going for a walk in the mountains when I was supposed to be at a conference. And while I was up there, I found a place to pray, and I was on the ground praying. And for lack of a better word in our language, I guess we'd say spirit. But it was daunting. It was so real. And I'll admit I didn't even have the nerve to look in his face. I looked at his legs and his feet and up around his waist. But he came up to me and he said something like, we're asking people like you if you'd like to join us in something. And he said, there's a moment coming in your world when it's going to feel like this massive explosion. And in that moment, the Creator is going to reach through all of the hearts that are open. And through this connection, the Creator is going to hold this thing so that one world passes away and another emerges. Do you want to be part of that? And I said, yeah. What do I have to do? And he kind of leaned over a bit and said, well, you're going to have to learn how to open your heart. Right? And I sat with that for a long time because I think that journey of opening our heart, it's still happening. And then I remember the piece that relates to what you said more directly is I was going to the farmer's market in Santa Fe one morning, just another morning. And, but suddenly, those moments when the veil just parts. And I was aware of so much pain. And it was breaking my heart. And what was puzzling to me in that moment was I could not understand all the people walking around me that were just, texting or scrolling or talking and having a good time. And I literally had to pull my truck over to the side of the road and just watch these people and feel what I was feeling. And as I did that, I just let my listening grow, right? And open and open and open, through my body. And when I got to the horizon of my awareness, I was suddenly aware of this presence of love that was so beautiful. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And I realized in that moment that our world was in labor and she was birthing something so beautiful. And it felt in that moment like her labor pains were pushing all of this darkness out of the way. And as if like all this pain and all this trouble was those things that are being pushed to the surface as she birthed. And it helped me understand in a different way that original part of this circle of visions. But like, in that very human way, I probably wanted to make that first vision an event, like boom. And then I realized that explosions like that extend across perhaps millennia, certainly many years, and that this labor is happening. And I think for me, part of the work personally and what I'm trying to do, like I'm going to go in a weekend or two and actually do a modification of Joanna's work around this theme with a group of people. How do we hold both? How do we be willing to look at what that labor is pushing before it? And how do we align with, this place of interconnectedness and interdependence, and that there is a greater intelligence and there is a love that is emergent.
There's something around like holding dichotomy, holding paradox.
The first thing I'm going to say actually isn't a vision, but it is from one of my elders. I remember I was at, I think it was the first ever EcoPsych conference back in the early 90s. And Father Thomas Berry was the keynote speaker. And what I walked away with was this beautiful piece where he said, you have to learn to get up every morning and go outside and get down on your knees and beg God for forgiveness, because you're a human being. And what we've done to the earth and continue to do, and what we've done to each other and continue to do. And then he said, you need to get up off your knees and stand up and look around and celebrate the beauty that's still here in such a way that your celebration of beauty is always bigger than your despair. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're lost, right? And you can feel that land, right? I can feel that land once again in my body. When I first encountered the despair and the grief, and I was trying to understand Joanna's work and John's seat at the time, because I felt it so deeply. In fact, I felt at home for the first time in my life with those people. That part of me that was grieving had a place. I don't think that level of grief is even meant to be felt alone. It's meant to be in relationship and in circle. But I was still struggling with this whole notion of despair and what is it, and grief. And so I was active in a sweat lodge community, so I took it to the lodge with one other person, And being a young man, I thought the way to get the answer was to heat it up, If you can't get the answer, just warm it up more. So I heated it up ridiculously hot. And I was just literally on the ground, and this voice suddenly said really clearly, it said, get up and go outside, right? And I was praying about an answer. And I crawled out of the door, and I'm on my hands and knees, and the voice said, get up, Mark, get out. And I stood up, and I'm weaving, and it said, open your eyes. I opened my eyes, and there was a murmuration of starlings. This was in the plains on Oklahoma. And this murmuration was moving right in front of me. And they did that thing, where they moved together. And this voice said, you and that species, your species and that species has a common ancestor. You must never forget that. Because if you learn to be connected, when the time comes, your kind too can be moved. And then it went on to show me, it said, the earth needs you to bear witness. You need to be willing to look in the face of what's happening. You need to stand at the edge of that abyss and let your heart break, so that heartbreak can feed into this bigger body. They said, don't ever prophesize where that darkness is going. Don't prophesize what it means. Just be willing to feel from where you are right now. The willingness to feel is what feeds that bigger body. She will make the movement. She'll move you. She'll move your kind if you're connected. And even that word connection is a paradox, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because it's all we are, it's all this is. But we've been inhabiting a lie and speaking one and dreaming one and acting one out.
A lie of separation.
A lie of separation. It's not all one, that we're not all connected.
Were you a little kid able to kind of move into the forest and just close your eyes and feel the voices of the forest around you?
I was blessed with a very unfortunate series of events in my childhood. I think that for some of us, we find healing in that shattering. The forest for me at that point in my life was, I think, refuge and solace. It wasn't voices, it was literally safety. I think that it got into me in a way that it took me decades to begin. As I was looking in myself, that's what I found, was how deeply I had been saved by the landscape and the debt I owed to the ground, and ferns and waves and water and trees. I remember distinctly the moment when I realized it saw something in me and held that for me until I could risk beginning to look at myself. And I think nature is continually holding the truth out to us.
There's a recognition of an intelligence and matrix of intelligence of which we are a part. What I'm hearing from you is that there was a transmission within you, and that in the journey of your own healing practice, you were able to more deeply recognize.
So that's a series of events, right? It's the journey. Your life goes on, and what touches you and who touches you. And those moments when that thread we mentioned earlier is coming together, right? And what these things connect you to, and then what you do with them.
There's a word in Sanskrit that comes to mind. The word is samvega. In English, especially in the kind of Western psychological treatment of it, it's been translated to mean like a breakdown, like a nervous breakdown, right? But the word actually means a breakthrough, because we don't just stop the breaking down. We have to also learn how to open our hearts enough to allow the flow of all of it.
And can't that feel on the way there like a breakdown? Because, I mean, you work with people too. The thing you hear over and over again when you ask people to touch grief is they're afraid it will annihilate them. And it will, but not in the way they're afraid of. Like I'm working right now. Joanna's been nudging me for a while to get out with her work again. And but I'm doing it along those lines, like I'm setting up her spiral so that I can work with, because of my background, I can work with one aspect of the spiral where we're attending a death, and another turn of the spiral that we're attending a birth, and that both are happening. And then I'm bringing a piece of constellation, family constellation work into it, so we can also feel our bodies physically in space in relation to other people that are touching this, and feel how it shifts and how it moves while we all hold it. I literally don't believe we're even meant to go there alone. I don't even think it's healthy. In fact, I would say this: I think that alone, the danger is it becomes despair. And I think despair is isolating, and despair ends up in hopelessness and disconnection. And I think grief, when we can move our despair into grief, which is what I think that relationship does and connection does, then grief is actually connecting. It's not disconnecting like despair. They're very different creatures. And yet they can be on this continuum of our feeling state. Right. And I think that having circle, having friendship, that can be the difference between despair and grief.
How have your experiences at births and deaths informed the circle of visions, this cycle where the beginnings and the endings reflect each other?
I have so much gratitude that I've been asked to be at births and deaths. I even have dreams about it. We're in the dreams. I'm grateful, right? Because it's a sacred place. I think that it's taught me so much about the intelligence that's at work here, right? It's taught me about the power of the constellation of bodies. You're given birth now, right? How people will spontaneously, if it's a healthy birth, arrange themselves in a room in just the right positions. And they'll move as it's happening, as this thing is birthing itself, right? I remember one birth I was at that, like a lot of births, it would go through such intensity and then you'd break through with this laughter. But there was this beautiful moment. The room was very dark. It was the middle of the night. It had been a hard birth. And the midwife and her apprentice and this other person who was assisting they're all between the legs of this woman. And I'm holding her and her husband is holding her. And the midwife goes, look, the baby's crowning, right? The baby's starting to crown. And there was just one little flashlight in the room. But I'll never forget this because suddenly where I went was I felt like I was seeing this light emerging from this woman's pelvis, and it was reflecting the faces of these three women, right? And it was shining out of their eyes into me and this man. And it was shining back, and it was like, you get it. It was like this thing was watching itself birth itself, right? And there was so much light. And yet, then I would find myself at a death, and it was that same thing. You could blindfold a lot of people that have done both, and they'll be able to tell you what they're at. It feels just the same. You're just going through the door the other direction, and there's this incredible presence and this incredible intelligence. And I've been at deaths where that same thing is happening, but that circle of beings that's looking are actually on the other side of the veil. Same light. The circle's just on which side of the doorway.
People have a sensitivity to the field, right? But you could blindfold them and they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a birth and a death. But there are plenty of people who kind of just are bewildered.
Well, there's some people that aren't going to want to feel that, right? And aren't interested. But if someone's interested, and for me, you know me, neurologically, physiologically, I'm a bottom-up person. And by that, I mean it's a cultivation of the body and attention and listening. As you know, I've studied Taoism now for many years and seriously for the past 10. And by seriously, I mean with a real teacher that knows it. And then I've been in the neuroscience kind of postgraduate study in fascial science for the past few years. It's all coming so alive in a way I never imagined. And yet it's coming alive in a way that makes me understand things I felt through my whole life and was always there. And it brings up, and you have a deep practice with your yoga. It's brought that place for me of, oh, this is why they practiced. Fascia is literally our largest sensory organ. How do we learn to, it's like in Taoism when they say, don't listen to your eyes, don't listen to your ears, don't, block the senses and go deeper, right? To me, my interpretation of that, now we're stepping outside of strict Taoist teaching, but to me, as I've listened to that and studied fascia, and I realized that fascia conducts light and sound, gold standard research, light and sound. What is this part of us that is listening to the world? So if we read a poem, right, and we both feel our bodies respond to the poem, which we do, it's because that our fascia is literally listening to the poem and transmitting the poem to the cells of our body. So for me, it's like that place of vision or that place of seeing, was scary to me as a young person, right? And at this point in my life, thanks to Taoist internal arts, it's as simple as that. And all I'm doing is just using my hands to open up my fascia and feel the world. It literally is our tissue that connects not only everything inside of us together, but connects us to everything. I've heard PhD anatomists now say they think that fascia just may be connected to the dark matter of the universe. So back to the question, how does one cultivate that place of vision? It's like more, how do you cultivate listening? How do you learn to pay attention in the way that information is landing in your system? When I've taught people how to listen to plants, I always say, listen below your neck, right? I want you to hear the plant as a sensation. How disrespectful to expect an organism as a species that's hundreds of millions of years older than us to expect it to speak English to you. It's, but can you listen below here? Then my body can metabolize that information over time. Then it comes up to this level, bottom up through my awareness. I think that when we cultivate some discipline, when we are really willing to be students of life, and stay on the ground, literally, there is so much help that arrives. There is so much help in unexpected places. Some of my best teachers, one of my best teachers never said a word to me. But
Let's meet him or her.
right now, I was a young man at I'll keep the name of the tribe out, but a traditional Sundance. I was there as a guest by another young man who was in training as a Sundance priest. And we worked together in the same nonprofit in the healing arts. He was an acupuncturist and I was doing my thing. And we were there and he said, hey, there's a lady that needs doctoring. And do you want to come help? Right? And I said, sure. And he said, I'm going to get my uncle. And this is uncle in their sense of the word. Like someone takes that role on, right? So he goes and gets his uncle, this man, Max. And he says to him, he says, hey, uncle, did you bring your plants? And the old man says, of course I did, right? But I'm looking at this guy and he's got on a t-shirt and a cowboy hat and a pack of cigarettes rolled up here and boots and jeans. And I'm thinking, where's the plants? Where's the baggage? Right? And we go over and this woman's laying on the ground and he speaks to her in their language. And I'm just watching this white kid standing there. And then after speaking with her, he reaches inside of his t-shirt and he pulls out what looks like a piece of that old post office string, right? And along the string are tied little bits of roots and stems. And he just sorts through looking for the plant he wants to use. He finds it and he scrapes it on his tooth a few times. And then he salivates, laid his hands on her. You can feel it, even still. And my whole paradigm as a young person studying herbs completely shifted without a word, because this man embodied a relationship to plants where all he needed was a hint of the phytochemistry, like the key that unlocked the door.
That he was so able to just feel the frequency that was needed, the healing frequency that was needed. Is that a language you would consider?
I would say he had an intimate enough relationship with that plant. He knew which doctor to refer her to.
Mm-hmm.
Understand? Yeah.
This is an interesting part of your work now. I mean, fast forward, that young white kid has become an elder practitioner. And the way that you work, as I've observed from the outside, is a kind of like leaning in, deeply listening, and then being able to like just draw from the intimacy of relationship that you have with so many healing allies. This is the medicine that's needed here. So can you share a little more about your process of working with other bodies?
Because I think there's a piece, there's like an overarching piece to all that. And that's an intimate relationship with and trust with the intelligence and potency of life itself. Because then if that's there and you have that, and that's birth and that's death, that's where we meet it in its most potent condensation, right? If you have that, then everything else comes under that, right? And you don't have to do anything. I was in a Neigong class just this last week, and my teacher said something I'd heard in various ways before, but she said, the alchemical agent is attention. And there's something about, to me, the potency of the breath of life, spirit, chi, whatever you want to call it. There's something about it when you learn to just simply pay attention. And now we're moving into this idea of wu wei, right? Where my words, I think it loves to be listened to. It turns and comes towards you. It turns and, if I meet you in my practice space and you come in and I look for what's wrong with you, we're going to have a very different experience than if I actually look for what's right, which was the great gift to me of Andrew Still, the founder of osteopathy. Can you find the health? Can you let that guide you? Can you let that be what's trying to emerge? Can you let that dictate what's going to happen here? Because the plants are just another face that wears. Everything is. And that wisdom, that intelligence knows exactly where this life is going. It knows how to birth itself. It's not afraid to die. And I think that for me, within that is also that idea that I think we each carry a thread. We each have something to offer. It's something that wants to express through the uniqueness of this configuration and can only come through this. And what is that? I got to throw this out. Earth dweller. It was all the clods at once become precious. It was the barn and the shed and the windmill, my hands, the crack Arlie made in the axe handle. Oh, let me stay here humbly, forgotten, to rejoice in it all. Let the sun casually rise and set. If I have not found the right place, teach me. For somewhere inside, the clods are vaulted mansions. Lines through the barn sing for the saints forever. The shed and windmill rear so glorious, the sun shudders like a gong. Now I know why people worship, carry around magic emblems, wake up talking dreams they teach to their children. The world speaks. The world speaks everything to us. It is our only friend. William Stafford. It goes into this idea of cultivation of who we are and community and people. But it's this idea of true human being. And it's an idea that we see expressed cross-culturally, no matter where we go. The old people will talk about, that we're born really to have a chance to become a true human being, right? I remember once talking with a a spiritual sister of mine on one of the pueblos here about this. And she put it this way. She said, you know, when you're at a big international airport and there's people everywhere, and suddenly you can't take your eyes off this one person that's walking past you. She said, you just saw one. And they're that rare. Right? But the idea that I like, that I see cross-culturally, and this goes back to what I do with people and what I believe, whether it's in ceremony or touching people or working with children. There's something else I could say there too. But it's this idea that to become a true human being means you learn to inhabit this line that runs between heaven and earth, that your heart is centered there, so that should the earth want to do something, you're literally online, you're available, right? If spirit wants to say something or do something, you're online, you're available. So again, like, to me, that idea of learning vision or learning listening is like, how do you cultivate? Because that line is a very real thing in the body. How do you learn to cultivate the body and your sense of connection starting inside here? And what's, how do you drop the conditioning and the held tensions that keep you from perceiving reality? And I do want to say one more thing, because you're a mom, and I happen to think you're a good one. The way I cultivated a lot of my relationship with plants, besides in the woods, was I would take them into sweat with me, and I would create these decoctions, plant and water, and I would pour them on the rocks and sit in silence and just feel. And sometimes, to be honest, I felt like I would sit with plants for years before they got me to the point where I could even understand them, right? And I think that's what they're holding out to us, actually. But this night, I'll never forget, because I was up on the mountain, and I lit my fire, had everything set up, and one of those sudden high mountain storms blew in. The trees were bending, and there was lightning, and so I waited for the storm to pass, and I went out there, and I got in there, and I sat with these different plants that night, and it was beautiful, and I learned a lot. And then I finished, and I went and got a little flashlight so I could gather all my things. And right across from me, where I was sure I'd cleaned down to the dirt, there was this little green plant growing. And I was in that, shall we say, God-intoxicated state, right? And I said, oh, you must have something to say. And I said, and wouldn't you know, I actually have 2 rocks left I didn't use, right? So I ran out and I got these rocks and I set them down and I closed the flap and I poured some water on and I said, so what's up? And boom, in a way I don't usually see, this woman was sitting across from me, an old indigenous looking woman with a basket. And I was startled and I said, what's going on? And she said, I'm really worried about the babies. And the timbre and tone of her voice just took that God intoxicated guy and like, bang, I was on the ground. And I said, well, what do you want? Do you want me to give children your plant? Who are you? And she said, no, that's not why I'm here. And I said, why are you here? And she said, we're asking all the people like you that we know if you'll work with babies and children. And I said, why? And she said, because the earth and what she's doing and what she's working on is calling in a lot of beings. Some of them haven't been here in a long time. Some of them have never been here. But because of what's going on in the field right now, they can't afford to fall asleep. We need people to be working with them to help them land in their bodies. Time is too urgent. They need to bring that thread they carry here. We need to tend to children. Help them bring that.
I have so much gratitude for your tenderness and your courage and your visionary wisdom in my life. And I'm grateful to share this conversation with others. Thank you, Mark. Hey, friends. Thank you so much for listening today. If you find value in these conversations, here's how you can support. Become a subscriber at seanperel.substack.com, and please rate, review, and share your favorite episode with a friend. I leave you with an original song written by Serena Joy Bixby for all of us still learning what it means to be human.
Is it love? Is it hate? Grief or heartache, or what does it mean to be human? Is it tears? Is it laughter? Is it not knowing what comes after? What does it mean to be human? Well, I'm sure I don't know. This life, where it goes, the days come, the days go, and I'm still human. Oh, one thing I know for sure is I'm looking for more. Gonna go out, learn what it means to be human. I find the joy in the mess. Oh, I'm just doing my best. Oh, learning what it means being human. Oh, learning what it means being human. I'm learning. Oh, learning what it means being human.